Hi guys, Buildzoid here, and this is just going to be a follow-up video to the previous video about the GPU pricing and supply being completely messed up right now. Because there's a few things I'd like to address. The first thing I'd like to address is that there's a bunch of people accusing me of being a shill for Nvidia and AMD because apparently I'm a privileged YouTuber who gets free GPUs. Well, I've got news for you. Nvidia has literally never sent me anything, not even an email asking if I'd be interested in like borrowing one of their cards. I'm relatively certain that if Nvidia's marketing department is aware of my existence, they probably wish that I didn't exist. Because one of my favorite pastimes is complaining about stupid Nvidia decisions, like, oh, I don't know, this power connector that keeps melting. Like, multi-billion-dollar corporation can't even figure out how to properly connect 12 volts to a GPU. Or more like connect 12 volts to a board. We wouldn't really want to send 12 volts to this. That would be bad. But you know, that's why I kind of wonder, why would you put your high like power stages directly behind the core? That just seems like a really brave design decision right there. Like, what if one of these fails? It's just going to nuke the chip, isn't it? But I guess from Nvidia's perspective, that's an upside, because that means you need to buy another expensive GPU. And I've complained about NVIDIA like blocking board partners from, well, using better power connectors, blocking board partners from making cards with extra VRAM, right? Like it used to be back in the day that you could get a GTX 680 with 4 gigs of VRAM. You can't get a RTX 4070 or a 4080 with double the VRAM, even though physically it would be entirely possible for those cards to come with twice as much VRAM, and it wouldn't even really cost that much because VRAM, unlike NVIDIA GPUs, is actually relatively cheap. But, you know, NVIDIA doesn't want gaming GPUs eating into their AI profits, so nobody is allowed to add extra memory chips to their GPUs, right? So those are all things that, like, yeah, like that's entirely in Nvidia's control and worth complaining about, right? Also, the fact that like Nvidia can't even rely, like they botch their quality assurance or some part of the like finalization process, because the way this works is NVIDIA gets chips from TSMC, and then they basically check that the chip is working properly. And they do the final configuration of the GPU before the GPU gets sold to board partners to actually put onto a PCB. And the thing is, like, evidently NVIDIA botched that final like configuration step because they're not, you know, they're shipping out cards with missing ROPs. That's something that's NVIDIA's fault. But the fact that NVIDIA can't get more GPUs from TSMC, not really NVIDIA's fault, right? You know what was pricing-wise NVIDIA's fault? The GTX Titan Kepler being $1,000. There wasn't a silicon shortage back then. They could have totally sold, and actually they did literally that. They made the 780 Ti, which you couldn't get with 6 gigs of VRAM, right? Because if you could get a 780 Ti with 6 gigs of VRAM, it would eat into the Titan sales. So you could get a 780 Ti with 3 gigs of VRAM, a fully enabled GPU core for a lower price than the original GTX Titan. So, you know, that's like Nvidia being intentionally very scummy and like manipulating the pricing of their products. But the current situation where there simply isn't enough RTX 5090 core supply for Nvidia to actually reach their insane MSRP, like, you know, if they actually got to the MSRP, we could complain about like, hey, it's not really, you know, it doesn't really make sense to charge, what is it, $2,000. I guess that is technically 25% more, but you know, it's like not a generational uplift if your new GPU is 25% more expensive and roughly 25% faster. Like, we could complain about that if Nvidia even was able to reach that stupid MSRP. But the fact that RTX 5090s are going for like, you know, insane prices on eBay, that's entirely outside of Nvidia's control. Right? That's just like, there's plenty of, also like Nvidia making PhysX proprietary, which led to its eventual death. And now like the 50 series doesn't have PhysX 32-bit support, so the 50 series runs like garbage in certain old games with PhysX turned on. Like, that's another thing you can blame on Nvidia, because that is actually within Nvidia's control. But ultimately, Nvidia can't, like, what, there's no more production capacity at TSMC. So the fact that the pricing for the 5090 right now is completely insane, as far as I'm concerned, not really NVIDIA's fault. Anyway, and also, they don't send me review samples. Never have, probably never will. And I've never seen a 4090 in person. I've never seen a 5090 in person. This is one of the big problems for me with doing PCB breakdowns, is that especially for high-end NVIDIA GPUs, I literally have to like try to piece together information off of the internet and then use photos from Tech Power Up because I don't have physical access to these cards. Because I don't get review samples and I'm not paying NVIDIA's insane prices. Like, I wouldn't pay $1,600 for a GPU even if NVIDIA was capable of reaching that price. But they're not. So, like, you know. Anyway, and on the AMD side of things, AMD does send me CPUs, but they did not sample me a 9070. And they've sent me, actually, and yeah, so AMD sends me CPUs, but they've never sent me any GPUs. However, I have technically received an XFX RX 480 back in the day. I did get to keep that. It unfortunately died during an LN2 overclocking session, but I did get sent a free RX 480. So yeah, I'm a very privileged YouTuber. I get all these high-end NVIDIA and AMD GPUs for free, and that's why when the RX 9070 XT launched, I was, you know, like, I went to overclockers.co.uk to see if maybe I could get one for a decent price, only to find out that even the overpriced models got completely sold out. But the big difference is that when I saw that the 9070 XT completely sold out, I didn't just go like, oh, AMD hates gamers. Because, like, I understand that, like, AMD doesn't actually make the GPU, TSMC does, and TSMC's manufacturing capacity is completely maxed out on silly corporate things like Radeon Instinct MI300s and NVIDIA's AI accelerators and 9700Xs and 7700Xs, because the funny thing about the 9700X CCD is that it's the same CCD that goes into one of these EPIC chips, and those are $12,000, right? So, like, when the 9070 XT sold out, I was just like, well, that makes sense. It's a big piece of silicon made at TSMC. TSMC doesn't have any spare like TSMC's manufacturing capacity is completely maxed out. So at $600, this is not going to be available. I don't see how that's shilling for any manufacturers. I'm not telling you that you should go buy a 5090. Okay, like, if you go buy a 5090 at $2,000 or a higher price, you're part of the problem. That's why the price is so damn high. But, like, that's not, you know, like, if you think that's a good deal, like, knock yourself out. Evidently, you have a lot more money than I do. Or a lot more disposable money than I do. Actually, that's not really true, because I could buy a 5090. I don't want to, because I think it's stupid. But yeah. And at the same time, I just don't think that NVIDIA's lack of control over the pricing is really NVIDIA's fault, because, like, it's in the wording. NVIDIA lacks control of the pricing. It's literally not in their control right now. Anyway. So yeah. I mean, you can still think I'm a shill, but I don't get review samples. So it's just, yeah. I just have a, I guess, much more understanding outlook on the GPU supply situation. It's like, yep, that's a lot of silicon. That is not a high enough price. There's no GPUs. What more is there to say? So anyway, another thing that I sort of forgot to bring up in the previous video. Actually, no, let's first correct a mistake that I made in that previous video. So what I didn't realize when I was making that original video is that N4P and 5 nanometer and like 4 nanometer and NVIDIA 4N and well, Intel 5 nanometer, like TSMC 5 nanometer. Like, I didn't realize that these were all actually kind of the same thing. So if we go over to TSMC's website, they have like 3 nanometer, which is used for like Intel Arrow like CPUs and a bunch of Apple products. And then there's 5 nanometer, which includes N5P, N4, N4P, N4X, N5A, and 4N, FinFET, the NVIDIA thing. That's just a customized version of TSMC 5 nanometer specifically for NVIDIA. But looking at TSMC's website, we can still see that TSMC Fab 18 is the main 5 nanometer production facility, and 3 nanometer is also made at Fab 18, which is the main 3 nanometer production facility. So what's kind of funny to think about is there's a pretty decent chance that both like 9070 XTs and 5090s are probably made under the exact same roof. Right? Like on the same machinery or within a couple hundred meters of each other. Actually, okay, but maybe less than a couple hundred meters of each other. But anyway, but yeah, so like so I did mess up. I didn't realize that these are not like significant, like these are all technically 5 nanometer. I did not realize that. But I think my point still stands. There's very limited manufacturing capacity for all of these 5 nanometer, like 5 nanometer is just completely maxed out, and there's no spare manufacturing capacity to do, if you want to like, to make gaming GPUs. And the other thing that I sort of forgot to bring up in the previous video is the Intel Arc B580. Okay, and the Intel Arc B580 is also made at TSMC. It's also made on 5 nanometer. It's like any GPU, it's absolutely massive. And Intel was like, yeah, this we're gonna sell 272 millimeters, 272 square millimeters of TSMC 5 nanometer silicon for $250. That is very realistic and totally achievable. So if you go try to buy an Arc B580 right now, you will find that it's either out of stock or massively overpriced. Funny how that works. It's almost like, everything that gets made at TSMC is expensive. And so cheap things, like, or attempts at making cheap products like the B580, don't work. All right, so like apparently Intel hates gamers, NVIDIA hates gamers, AMD hates gamers, everybody hates gamers. It's totally not that they're all manufactured in like probably the same factory, and that factory literally is completely maxed out. Admittedly, it's maxed out on a bunch of AI accelerators like the Radeon Instinct MI300 and server CPUs like the EPYC, but the thing is the EPYC 9575F, which might have a price of like $12,000 almost, like that uses the same chips as like a 9700X or a 9800X 3D, and like the 9800X 3D has supply issues, right? Also made at TSMC. In fact, it uses more TSMC silicon than the regular 9700X, so that's probably why. Actually, I kind of suspect the 9800X 3D is probably like packaging constrained or something rather than chip manufacturing, but it could be both. Like, I don't know. But either way, like, this is just like literally everything that's made at TSMC is either expensive or not available. Those are the only two options because there's no capacity. And so, like from my perspective, this isn't like, oh, NVIDIA, like NVIDIA has some like there's some grand conspiracy at NVIDIA to screw gamers. I mean, there is. That like there are there's other, but the current pricing and supply situation of the 5090 is not part of that conspiracy. The NVIDIA conspiracies are things like putting, 8 gigs of VRAM on a 4060 Ti. See this right here? That is an NVIDIA conspiracy. But the fact that NVIDIA can't figure out how to make $2,000 5090s actually available, not really an NVIDIA conspiracy. Right? And another thing I saw but brought up was like, well, why don't, the GPU manufacturers just delay the launch to build up supply? Well, have you looked at the supply of the 4090? The 4090 has been available for over 2 years. And during that time, as far as I know, it has basically never been available for MSRP. That means that in 2 years, NVIDIA was never able to meet this demand for a 4090. So, of course, when they switched production from 4090s to 5090s, they would probably have to produce 5090s for like several years before they would reach the launch day demand requirements. Also, keep in mind that the more they delay the launch, the more demand is going to be built up for the launch, right? So it's like an unhittable, like it's a target that keeps getting further away the longer you like spend trying to reach it. Um, so really the only option that would like I guess not upset people is if Nvidia just decided not to launch a 5090 at all, which is like I guess that's an option. I don't really see how that's better though. Like, you know, um I think like as much as like, it comes with a stupid power connector and I mean that's really the main complaint for the 5090 and the price being insane. I still think the 5090 is a cool product. It's not a product I'll ever I'll buy one maybe in like 10 years when it's dirt cheap on eBay, but I still like I think it's cool. I'm kind of happy that it exists, but I'm not buying one until it gets cheaper. Um and I don't blame and I also don't see it as Nvidia's fault that the price is like way above MSRP. Um cuz like yeah, that just doesn't make sense to me. Um Anyway, another sort of funny thing is that I'm not even entirely certain that it's fair to blame TSMC for the lack of gaming GPUs because TSMC themselves are entirely dependent on getting EUV machines, which are made by one company. So, um, yeah, if ASML is like behind on making EUV machines, you literally can't make fancy like 5 nanometer transistors. Like you can't open a new 5 nanometer factory unless you can get machines from ASML. So like, that's like this whole supply chain for gaming GPUs is just it's just screwed. Um, oh, and the other thing with the like, why don't they build up more launch supply? So first things first is like, well, Nvidia literally could never catch up with supply for like could never could never match the demand for 4090s in 2 years. So there's like no chance they could have ever built enough supply for 5090 launch. But the other thing is I guess some people like I saw some comments that were like, oh well, other consumer electronics companies don't have massive supply issues like the gaming GPU manufacturers do. Well, I'm assuming that comment primarily was talking about Apple and the iPhone. And the funny thing about the iPhone is that the chip is really small, relatively speaking, right? Like one iPhone is literally a seventh of a 5090. So yeah, Apple has plenty of iPhones to sell because the chip isn't anywhere near as big as even an Intel Arc B580. This is already like more than 2.5 times bigger than an iPhone chip, right? Like, so yeah, if you make normal consumer electronics that aren't gaming GPUs, you don't have supply problems because the chips you're selling aren't freaking monstrosities. Um, That's why, like, that's the whole issue with gaming GPUs is that there really are an anomaly in the like silicon industry in that they're absolutely gigantic, and then the price doesn't reflect that. Um, and historically, as gamers, we've just been really lucky that there wasn't anything better to do with that silicon like manufacturing capacity, right? Because if Nvidia back when the like GTX 500 series days, like if Nvidia had massive demand from like data centers for GTX 580s or something, there wouldn't be any GTX 580s for gamers. All right? So this situation is like it sucks, I really wanted to buy a 9070 XT, not a regular 9070. Those are still available here in the UK, but they're available for the same price as a RX 9070 XT, so that seems kind of silly. Um but yeah, Like, the situation sucks, but I don't really think it's fair to blame Nvidia, AMD, or even Intel for the fact that, like, TSMC literally cannot make more GPUs without, like, cutting into AI accelerator production. Now, you could maybe make the argument that, you know, the shareholders of Nvidia and AMD should find it in their cold, dead corporate hearts to care about gaming GPU prices. That's not going to happen, right? Like, this is just not going to happen. Like, AMD's shareholders and Nvidia's shareholders literally could not give less of a damn about gaming GPU prices. They don't care. So you will just have to get used to the fact that unless we get, like, massive oversupply of silicon production capacity, there aren't going to be affordable gaming GPUs in reasonable, like, that you can just go to a store and buy one, because AMD seems to be trying to make the RX 9070 XT somewhat available. Yeah, like, Nvidia, as far as I can tell, has just, like, given up. And I kind of suspect that the 5080 primarily exists because it's smaller than a 4090. Like, I really think the thought process at Nvidia was like, well, we need to launch a 5080 just so we can, like, get rid of the 4090. Because this is too big. Like, this is a problem. We can't keep making this. This needs to go away. Because the 5080 is almost like 4090 levels of performance. Actually, that's probably why Nvidia was pushing the 5070 as, like, though they ended up deciding that they're not going to actually make any 5070s. So I guess the thought process was, like, hoping to trick people into believing that a 5070 is the same performance as a 4090, and then they could win the gaming market and the AI market, but that didn't pan out. So I guess no more GPUs for anybody. I mean, no more gaming GPUs, only AI accelerators. Anyway, this video is now way longer than it really needs to be, but yeah, like, I'm not saying you should go buy an overpriced GPU, okay? Don't actually do that. I don't really know what to tell you as far as, like, GPU buying advice, because if, like, I can understand, like, if you don't currently have a GPU, you're screwed. But, like, you know, what is there to do? Like, TSMC's maxed out, and nobody else makes GPUs. So here we are, I guess. So hopefully, like, AMD actually manages to deliver 9070s in reasonable quantities at reasonable prices, but I wouldn't get my hopes up because this is a lot of silicon. Yeah, thanks for watching. If you'd like to support the channel for some reason, there's links in the description. And that's it. Oh, yeah, you could, like, check those out. That would be much appreciated. And that's it. So thanks for watching, and goodbye.